The sun was just peeking over the horizon, painting the farmland in soft gold, when I first noticed her car tearing down the old dirt road. At first, I thought it was a fluke, maybe someone late for work or a lost traveler. But as the days passed, her black SUV became a constant menace. She didn't slow down for the bumps. She didn't wave when she passed. She drove like she owned the place. I tried asking my neighbors if they had seen her, hoping maybe someone knew who she was. "Oh, that's Corinne," old Mr. Thompson said with a sigh. "She's got a temper worse than a thunderstorm. Likes to push people around." That explained a lot, I realized, but it didn't make the problem any smaller. I first met Corinne when I bought this property 3 years ago. She lived a few miles down the road and had a reputation for thinking the world revolved around her. At community meetings, she always found a reason to complain about the mailbox placement, the fence lines, even the dirt road itself. And now it seemed she had taken it upon herself to drive through my land as if it were a shortcut. The first time she plowed through my field, my heart sank. Corn stalks crushed under her tires, mud flying everywhere. I ran after her, waving my arms, but she didn't even look my way. The engine's roar swallowed my shouts, and before I knew it, she was gone. I called the county, filed a complaint, and hoped it would solve the problem. But nothing changed. I tried talking to her directly too. "Corinne," I said one morning, standing at the edge of the road, "I'd appreciate it if you didn't drive through my property." She just laughed, a high-pitched, cruel sound, and said, "Oh, relax. It's just a road." "Don't be so uptight. It wasn't just a road. It was my livelihood, my sanctuary, and she had no right to treat it like her personal racetrack." I started considering options. Signs, fences, cameras, all were possibilities. But Corinne had a knack for ignoring boundaries. I needed something more permanent, something she wouldn't ignore. That's when the idea came to me, late one night, staring at the dirt road under the silver light of the moon. Spike strips. I wasn't going to use them in a way that would injure anyone seriously, of course. I knew enough to make them painful enough to stop her without causing permanent harm. I sketched out a plan, measured the width of the road, and spent days sourcing materials. By the time I had everything ready, Corinne had driven through my farm 3 more times. Each time, my frustration grew, simmering like a pot left too long on the stove. The night before I intended to lay the strips, I walked the road alone. The moon reflected off the dew in the grass, and the silence of the farm enveloped me. I dug shallow trenches, just enough to hide the strips beneath a layer of dirt. My hands were blistered and sore, but satisfaction coursed through me with every placement. By morning, it would be done. Morning came with a quiet tension. I hid behind the barn, heart hammering. The sun glinted off the road ahead, and I saw the familiar black SUV approaching. I held my breath as she picked up speed, laughing at some imaginary joke. Then her tires hit the spike strips, and a loud, painful thump echoed down the road. She slammed the brakes, swearing, and jumped out of the car. I watched from the barn, satisfied but also wary. Karen was unpredictable, and I had no idea what she'd do next. But for now, my farm had a small victory, and I finally felt a sliver of peace. Corinne's screams echoed across the fields as she stomped around her SUV, dragging her hands through the mud where her tires had snagged on the hidden spike strips. I stayed low behind the barn, not wanting to alert her to my presence. Part of me wanted to run out and confront her, to finally tell her exactly what I thought of her, but another part wisely knew it would only escalate things. She pounded on the hood of her car, muttering under her breath in a furious stream of expletives. Every so often, she would stomp over the dirt road, inspecting the strips like she expected them to apologize for ruining her day. I could see her rage simmering, and for the first time, I felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. This was a dangerous game I had started, but it felt like the only way to defend my farm. After a long, tense moment, she finally climbed back into the SUV, trying to drive off. But the strips had done their job, the tires were shredded, and the vehicle barely moved. Karen slammed it into reverse and backed up violently, cursing the entire time. I couldn't help but stifle a laugh. She was powerless on my land, just as I had felt powerless every time she barreled through before. I didn't wait for her to try again. I ran out to the edge of the road, trying to assess the damage without revealing myself completely. The SUV sat crooked, its tires mangled beyond repair. Karen leaned against the car, clearly calculating her next move. That's when I realized I couldn't just stop at this small victory. If she ever returned, she'd escalate, and so would I. The next few days were tense. I reinforced the spike strips, made sure the dirt road had no easy bypass, and even placed a few decoy strips in areas where she might attempt another shortcut. Meanwhile, I kept an eye out from my porch, binoculars in hand, watching the distant horizon for any sign of her black SUV. Sure enough, she returned. But this time, she wasn't alone. Karen had brought 2 other vehicles with her friends, or maybe hired help. I wasn't sure. They slowed down as they neared the road, looking suspicious. I could see her pointing and yelling at them, obviously trying to come up with a plan to conquer my property. My stomach twisted with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. I knew a confrontation was inevitable, but I wasn't going to back down. I had spent too long defending my farm, too long watching my hard work trampled. Karen had no respect for boundaries, and now it was time to show her exactly what that meant. I grabbed my old shotgun from the corner of the barn, not to harm anyone, but to make a show of authority if necessary. I didn't want to escalate to violence, but I also didn't want her to underestimate me. Standing there, the weight of the gun in my hands, I felt a strange sense of power. For once, I was in control. Karen's SUV crested the hill, tires kicking up dirt. She didn't notice the new decoy strips I had laid, and her car bounced violently when it hit them. Her friends shouted in panic, and I realized she might finally understand the consequences of her reckless behavior. As she scrambled to reverse again, I stepped out from my hiding spot, waving my shotgun to get their attention. Karen froze, her face a mix of shock and fury. She opened her mouth to scream, but the sight of me standing there, determined and unflinching, stopped her. "Leave my property," I said, voice calm but firm, echoing across the fields. "Or next time, it won't just be your tires that get damaged." For a moment, silence reigned. Then Karen slammed the door, and her friends muttered threats as they tried to back the SUV off the road. I stayed where I was, refusing to budge until they were gone. When the dust settled and the cars disappeared over the horizon, I allowed myself a small sigh of relief. This was only the beginning. Karen wasn't someone who would accept defeat easily. I knew the next time she returned, she'd come with a new plan, and I'd have to be ready. But for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just defending my farm, I was finally fighting back. The days that followed were quieter, but I knew it was only the calm before the storm. Karen didn't come around, but I could feel her presence in every minor disruption on my farm. Tires flattened on distant roads, strange footprints near the fence line, even marks in the mud that hinted she had driven past at night. She was testing me, probing for weaknesses. I spent my mornings repairing the fields she had damaged before, replanting crushed corn stalks, and filling in the ruts her tires had left behind. At first, the work was tedious and frustrating, but over time, it became therapeutic, a way to reclaim control over my land. Each seed I planted felt like a small act of defiance, a statement that my farm was mine and mine alone. One afternoon, I was repairing a fence along the northern edge when I saw her car in the distance. The black SUV crested the hill slowly this time, as if she had learned to be cautious. I ducked behind the fence post, binoculars in hand, trying to figure out her plan. She wasn't alone again. This time she had 2 men with her, men I didn't recognize. They seemed less reckless than her friends had been, surveying the property like mercenaries rather than tourists. Corinne stepped out of the SUV, hands on her hips, glaring at the fields. She waved at the men, pointing at the dirt road, and I realized they were going to attempt something bigger than just driving through. My mind raced. I couldn't let them destroy more of my land, but I also knew a direct confrontation could get dangerous. I needed a strategy. That night, I worked under the light of my barn lamp, reinforcing the spike strips and adding a few new obstacles along the dirt road. I even dug a few shallow trenches, careful to camouflage them so they wouldn't be visible until it was too late. By dawn, the road was a labyrinth of deterrents designed to frustrate anyone who tried to take it lightly. The next encounter came sooner than I expected. At sunrise, Corinne's SUV appeared again, moving cautiously along the road. I watched from the barn roof as the men helped her navigate the first few strips, trying to avoid the worst of the damage. But the deeper they went, the more chaotic it became. Tires slipped, vehicles jostled, and the men's shouts filled the morning air. Corinne, predictably, was furious. She slammed her hands against the steering wheel, screaming orders that were ignored, her controls slipping with every failed maneuver. I almost felt sorry for her, almost, but the truth was, she had brought this on herself. Every reckless drive, every disregard for boundaries had led to this moment. I stayed on the barn roof for hours, documenting every move they made, taking notes for the inevitable confrontation. When they finally retreated, defeated, and humiliated, I felt a small surge of triumph, but it was fleeting. I knew Corinne wouldn't let this go. She was a storm that wouldn't dissipate quietly. By the end of the week, I began noticing subtle signs that she had shifted tactics. There were marks near my barn door, footprints that suggested she had walked the property at night. I found scraps of paper left near the fence post threats, scrawled in hurried handwriting. It wasn't just about the road anymore. Karen wanted to get inside my life, to make me feel powerless. I spent that night sitting in the kitchen, looking at the map of my property spread across the table. I circled the main dirt road, traced the paths she might take, and started planning the next phase of defense. This wasn't going to be just about spike strips anymore. I needed surveillance, traps, and a way to reclaim my peace of mind permanently. Somewhere in the darkness outside, I could feel her plotting. Karen was patient when she wanted to be, and I knew that the next move could come at any moment, but I also knew one thing: I wasn't going to let her win. Not my farm. Not my life. By the next morning, I could sense that Corinne had grown more calculating. The chaos of her last visit had left the dirt road marred and uneven, but she didn't retreat entirely. No, she was watching, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. I knew this because the fence lines bore new marks, small scratches in the paint, where she had tested the boundaries, and my security camera caught a glimpse of her lurking near the edges of the property at odd hours. I realized that relying solely on spike strips wouldn't be enough anymore. She had learned to navigate them cautiously, and the men she brought last time seemed more competent. I needed a plan that would make her think twice before returning. Over the next few days, I pored over ideas. I considered cameras with alarms, motion sensors, even the idea of constructing a fake path to lure her into a trap. While planning, I continued my daily farm work, repairing damage, feeding the animals, and tending to the crops. There was a certain satisfaction in returning the farm to order, as if every repaired fence and replanted field was a small victory over Corinne's chaos. The physical labor gave me clarity. It reminded me why I fought for this land. Late one evening, I spotted movement near the tree line that bordered my cornfield. My heart rate jumped as I grabbed my binoculars. It was her, the black SUV, glinting under the fading sunlight, but she was alone this time. Her approach was slow, almost deliberate, and her face was unreadable. She wasn't just coming through to harass anymore. I could feel a cold sense of purpose. I stayed hidden behind the barn, watching her maneuver the vehicle along the uneven dirt road. She hesitated at every strip, almost cautiously avoiding them. But I noticed something unusual. She was making small marks in the dirt, as if mapping the placement of the obstacles. It hit me then. Corinne had begun planning her own counterattack. She wasn't just reckless. She was cunning. The next few days were tense. Every sound outside, tires crunching gravel, a branch snapping, even distant engine roars, made me jump. I reinforced the spike strips again, added hidden trenches, and placed decoys to confuse anyone unfamiliar with the road. I also installed a few cameras in strategic locations, hoping to capture any evidence of her trespassing. Karen returned again at dusk. She drove slower this time, taking careful notes, but her frustration was palpable. I stayed perched in the barn loft, camera in hand, documenting her every move. She was meticulous, circling the field, tracing the path she might have taken before. But even with her careful approach, the spike strips claimed another tire. Her vehicle shuddered and jerked violently, forcing her to stop in the middle of the road. I could hear her shouting, banging the steering wheel, and muttering threats that drifted across the field like poison. I resisted the urge to confront her immediately. This was working. She was beginning to realize that my farm wasn't a playground. The more frustrated she became, the more I knew she was being broken down, mentally if not physically. By nightfall, she retreated again, leaving behind tire tracks that were jagged and damaged. I walked along the road afterward, inspecting the marks. The sight gave me a strange satisfaction. It was evidence of her persistence, but also of her defeat. She had tried to outsmart me, but the farm had its own rules, and they were mine to enforce. That night, I sat by the kitchen window. The map of the farm spread across the table once more. I realized this wasn't just about defending a road anymore. It was about asserting control, about making it clear that boundaries existed for a reason. And Karen, persistent, arrogant, relentless Karen, was about to learn that some lines were not meant to be crossed. By midweek, it became clear that Karen was no longer just testing me, she was obsessed. Every day, I noticed subtle signs, footprints near the barn, tire tracks along the edges of the field, and even objects moved from where I had left them. She had begun treating my farm like a puzzle to solve, not someone else's property to respect. I knew I had to escalate my defenses. The spike strips were effective, but she had started studying them. I couldn't rely on the same tactics repeatedly. She would adapt. Over the next few days, I worked tirelessly, creating a network of deterrence. Small trenches, cleverly camouflaged mud pits, and decoy strips that appeared threatening but did minimal damage, all designed to confuse her and slow her down. One afternoon, while repairing the fence line near the northern field, I heard the roar of an engine. Karen had returned, this time with a single companion, a young man who seemed nervous, probably realizing he had been dragged into one of her schemes. The SUV approached slowly, as if testing every inch of the road. I stayed hidden, binoculars in hand, noting how cautiously she moved. Her focus was sharp, almost obsessive. She leaned out the window, scanning the ground for traps, pointing to her companion, and muttering in a low voice. Despite the careful maneuvering, her tires hit one of the new trenches I had dug. The vehicle jolted violently, sending her sprawling over the steering wheel. I could hear her furious screams as the SUV struggled to regain balance. I stepped out from my hiding place, keeping a safe distance. "I warned you," I shouted across the field, voice firm. "Leave my property." She froze, spinning the wheel frantically, her face a mix of shock and anger. I noticed the young man glance nervously between her and me. It was clear that even Karen's allies were beginning to realize the seriousness of the situation. The next few nights were quiet. I used the downtime to reinforce my defenses further and repair the damages she had inflicted. I also began documenting everything: tire tracks, footprints, and any damage to my property. I had a plan forming in my mind. If she refused to stop, I would have irrefutable evidence to involve the authorities in a way that couldn't be ignored. Then came the night of the confrontation I had been anticipating. Karen returned alone, under the cover of darkness, probably assuming I was asleep. The moonlight glinted off the black SUV as it approached the first decoy strip. I stayed hidden, holding my flashlight and recording everything. As expected, the tires hit the strip with a loud crunch, jolting the car and sending her shouting into the empty fields. I waited until she tried to reverse, then stepped out, shining the light directly at her. "This ends tonight, Karen. Get off my property." For a moment, she seemed stunned, caught between rage and fear. Then, with a wild laugh that sent chills down my spine, she said, "You think you can stop me? You're just a farmer." Her arrogance had always been her weakness. I could see it now, clear as day. She underestimated me, assumed she could intimidate me as she did everyone else. But this time, she had crossed a line, and she would pay the price. By the time she finally drove off, beaten and frustrated, I realized the fight was far from over, but I had the upper hand. I had learned her patterns, anticipated her moves, and reinforced my defenses. The farm was mine, and Karen was beginning to realize that she couldn't bully her way through my life. The following week was a tense game of anticipation. I couldn't sleep without imagining Karen plotting her next move. Every creak of the barn, every rustle in the cornfield, made my pulse quicken. She had become more than just a nuisance. She was a threat, testing boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. But I refused to back down. My farm was my sanctuary, and I would protect it at all costs. I spent daylight hours repairing damage and reinforcing the perimeter. Nights were dedicated to surveillance. I set up cameras in hidden spots and even rigged small tripwires connected to noise-making devices, nothing harmful, but enough to alert me if she came near. My mind was a mix of excitement and anxiety. This was no longer about frustration. It had become a tactical war. One evening, I noticed tire tracks near the northern edge of the property, fresh and deep. Karen had returned. But this time, her strategy was different. The SUV was parked at the far end of the field, lights off, and I could see her moving stealthily, carrying what looked like tools. It was clear she intended to dig, tamper, or bypass my obstacles. I tightened my grip on my binoculars and watched carefully. As she moved closer, I activated one of my hidden alarms. A loud clang echoed through the fields, and Karen froze, her body tense. I didn't confront her immediately. I let the sound do its work. Slowly, I could see her scanning the surroundings, trying to locate the source. This was exactly what I had hoped for. Her control was slipping. She backed off slightly, muttering under her breath. I took this moment to make subtle adjustments, camouflaging new traps and adding decoys along the main dirt road. Every inch of that road had become a chessboard, and I was thinking several moves ahead. The next night, Karen returned with a new approach. She had brought what appeared to be a small bulldozer. Her plan was obvious: bypass the spike strips entirely by clearing a path. I felt a mix of awe and anger. Her persistence was unmatched, but she was also reckless. She had underestimated the planning I had put into the terrain. I stayed hidden, waiting for the moment. As the bulldozer moved forward, the decoy strips and shallow trenches disrupted the wheels. The vehicle lurched, skidding across the uneven ground. Karen cursed violently, shouting orders to no one. Her frustration was evident. She was struggling to maintain control over both the machine and her temper. It was at this moment I stepped into view. The beam of my flashlight illuminated her and the bulldozer. "Step away from my property, Karen," I said, voice firm. "This ends tonight. You have two choices, leave or risk serious consequences. She froze, the reality of her predicament sinking in. For the first time, I saw hesitation in her eyes. Her confidence, her arrogance, all faltered. She glanced at the damaged SUV she had left behind and the new trenches now surrounding her, and I could see the gears turning in her mind. Finally, with a loud, frustrated growl, she slammed the bulldozer into reverse and retreated. I watched her disappear into the darkness, the vehicle sputtering, her plan foiled once again. I allowed myself a deep breath. This was a small victory, but I knew she wouldn't give up easily. That night, I sat by the kitchen window, mapping out every detail. Karen's persistence meant I needed a final solution, a way to end this conflict once and for all without resorting to illegal or dangerous actions. I began drafting plans for a visible boundary system, strategically placed cameras, and legal documentation to ensure that my property rights were unassailable. I knew Karen would return. She always did. But for the first time, I felt prepared. My farm was no longer just a piece of land. It was a fortress, my strategy tested and refined by her relentless assaults. And deep down, I knew that the next time she came, I would be ready to end this once and for all. The next few days were deceptively quiet too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your skin and warns you something is coming. My animals sensed it too. The horses grew restless at night, and the dogs paced the yard with their ears perked toward the fields. I took the stillness as a sign that Karen was preparing something bigger, something more desperate. I upgraded my perimeter again, this time adding motion-triggered spotlights and reinforced fencing near the areas she had tested before. I was no longer just reacting, I was predicting. Every pattern she had shown, every route she had taken, played in my mind like a map of her intentions. 3 nights later, it began. A faint hum drifted across the field, low and steady, like the rumble of an approaching storm. I didn't need binoculars to know it was her. I stepped onto the porch slowly, keeping the lights off. The moon was full, illuminating the dirt road and the surrounding fields in a cold silver glow. Karen emerged from the tree line on foot, no SUV this time. Instead, she carried 2 things, a crowbar and a portable spotlight. My chest tightened. She wasn't looking to sneak through anymore. She was looking to dismantle my defenses piece by piece. I slipped around the barn, staying downwind and out of sight. She moved cautiously but purposefully, shining the light over the road to inspect the ground. When she spotted the first spike strip, she crouched and jabbed at the dirt with the crowbar, trying to expose the metal beneath. I watched silently, documenting everything with my phone. This time, I needed clear evidence. The authorities couldn't ignore a trespasser with tools, actively tampering with property. But Karen wasn't working alone. As she dug, 2 figures emerged from the shadows, a man and a woman, both wearing hooded jackets. They approached quietly, scanning the area as if expecting an ambush. I clenched my jaw. She had brought reinforcements again, but this time, they weren't supporting her as hired help. They were accomplices. Karen whispered harshly, "We break these, then the road opens." He can't stop all of us. My grip tightened around the phone. She was planning a full breach. I stepped back and triggered the first part of my countermeasure, a motion-activated floodlight I had installed earlier that day. A blinding beam lit up the entire road like daylight. Karen shrieked, stumbling back, shielding her eyes. The 2 accomplices panicked, looking around frantically. This was my moment. I stepped into the light's edge, not too close, but close enough for my silhouette to be unmistakable. "That's enough," I said, voice cutting through the night with steady authority. "You're trespassing. All of you." Karen whipped around, rage twisting her features. "You think you can scare me with lights? With toys?" she snapped. "This road isn't yours. I've driven it for years." "It's been mine for 3, I replied calmly. "And you've ignored every boundary, every warning." Her accomplices exchanged uneasy glances. It was clear now they had been misled. They weren't expecting a fortified farm or a calm, unwavering landowner. They were expecting another one of Karen's petty battles. I lifted my phone. "You can walk away right now, or I call the sheriff with this video." Karen froze. Her arrogance faltered. The truth hit her. This time, she wasn't in control. The light illuminated her clearly, crowbar in one hand, my damaged spike strip in the other, two accomplices looking ready to bolt. "You wouldn't," she hissed. "I will," I said quietly. "And the moment I do, they won't protect you. They'll protect themselves." The woman with her took a step back. "Karen, you didn't say it was like this," the man chimed in. "We're not getting arrested for this." They turned and fled into the night without another word, leaving Karen alone on the road, breathing hard, trembling with fury she no longer knew how to wield. For the first time, her confidence cracked. She stared at me, jaw clenched, but her eyes held something different fear. "I'll be back," she spat. "You haven't won. Then come back in daylight," I replied. "And bring the sheriff with you." "Let's see who he agrees with." She didn't answer. She backed away slowly, then turned and sprinted after her fleeing accomplices. I remained under the floodlight for several minutes, listening to the night settle again. The farm felt different now, not just defended, but dominant. She was losing ground, losing allies, and losing the illusion that she had any right here. But I knew Karen well enough to understand one thing. Desperation makes people dangerous. She wouldn't stop now. She would escalate again because losing to her was unthinkable, and when she did, I would be ready. The following days were uneasy. The night of the floodlight confrontation had shaken Karen, but I knew it was only temporary. She was unpredictable, and her ego refused to accept defeat. Every creak in the barn, every rustle in the cornfield set my nerves on edge. I spent hours walking the property, checking the spike strips, reinforcing the trenches, and ensuring the fences were secure. By midweek, my vigilance paid off. I spotted tire tracks near the eastern boundary fresh, deliberate, but smaller than her usual SUV trucks. She had switched vehicles, perhaps planning to test the defenses in something more nimble. I crouched behind the barn with my binoculars, watching the headlights flicker in the distance. Karen emerged again, her new vehicle, a compact black pickup, moving slowly along the dirt road. She looked more focused than ever, her movements precise. It was clear she had studied the previous failures and intended to adapt. This wasn't just persistence anymore. It was strategy. I stayed hidden, observing as she navigated the spike strips cautiously. She slowed at every trench, scanning the ground for traps, her eyes darting back and forth. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. She was trying to master the terrain, but she underestimated just how many traps I had set. Midway down the road, the pickup hit a concealed trench I had dug specifically for this purpose. The wheels dug into the soft dirt, causing the vehicle to tilt precariously. Karen cursed loudly, slamming her hand on the dashboard. I remained unseen, documenting every movement, knowing this evidence could finally put an end to her reckless trespassing if needed. Her determination didn't waver, though. She climbed out of the truck, muttering, and began inspecting the obstacle, trying to figure out how to remove or bypass it. I could see her mind racing, calculating, planning, but she was alone this time, no accomplices to follow her lead. That made her vulnerable. I activated a second line of defense. Motion-triggered alarms and small hidden noise devices strategically placed along the road. They sounded as she moved, startling her and forcing her to stumble. Her frustration boiled over. She dropped her crowbar and shouted, slamming her hands on her head. It was at that moment I decided to reveal myself, but not fully. I stepped out from behind the barn, keeping my flashlight low and my silhouette partially hidden. "Karen," I called out, voice calm but firm. This ends tonight. You've tested my patience, my property, and my rules. Leave now." She turned sharply, eyes wide, realizing she had been outmaneuvered once again. "You can't stop me." She screamed, but her voice lacked the usual certainty. For the first time, fear flickered across her face. I stepped a little closer, keeping my stance authoritative, but non-threatening. "I can," I said evenly. "And I have. You've trespassed, tampered with my property, and ignored every warning. You have one choice: leave and never return." Karen froze, her chest heaving, eyes darting around for an escape route. The pickup groaned under the strain of the trench, tires half buried, and she realized she was trapped if she stayed. Finally, with a growl of frustration, she stormed back to the vehicle, slammed the door, and backed up carefully, maneuvering out of the trench. She drove away slowly, glancing back once, rage and disbelief etched across her face. I watched until the headlights disappeared over the horizon. The farm was silent again, but I knew this wasn't the end. Karen had pride, stubbornness, and a need to assert control that wouldn't allow her to quit easily. That night, I inspected every spike strip, trench, and decoy. The pickup had caused minimal damage, but the attempt proved that Karen was escalating, and I needed to be ready. I began planning the next phase of visible boundary system, new surveillance, and legal measures to finally cement the farm as mine and mine alone. As I locked up for the night, I knew one thing: Corinne's obsession had reached a critical point. She would return, and when she did, the stakes would be higher. But unlike her, I had patience, preparation, and control. And this time, I would win, not just in a battle of tires and trenches, but in the final showdown of wills. The next morning, the farm felt unusually quiet, too quiet. Even the animals seemed on edge, ears twitching at distant noises. I walked the dirt road slowly, inspecting every spike strip, every trench, every decoy I had set. Karen's attempt with the pickup had been a warning, a signal that she wasn't finished, and that the next move would be her boldest yet. I spent the day preparing. I reinforced the spike strips with new materials, added more concealed trenches, and even built a small, camouflaged barricade in one section of the road. This time, I wanted a trap that she couldn't ignore, one that would force her to see the consequences of crossing me. By dusk, I had everything in place. I stationed myself in the barn loft, binoculars and phone at the ready. The fields glimmered under the fading sun, shadows stretching across the dirt road. I knew she would come tonight. She never let her obsessions wait. And then I saw her headlights flicker in the distance. Corinne was alone this time, in a car I didn't recognize, sleek, black, fast. She moved carefully, scanning the road with intense focus. I watched her pause at every spike strip, leaning out the window, muttering calculations. It was clear she had learned from her past failures, but I had anticipated her every adaptation. Halfway down the road, her car hit the first concealed trench I had built. It jolted violently, the tires spinning, and she cursed under her breath. I stayed hidden, documenting everything. This was evidence I could take to the authorities if it came to that. She climbed out, furious, pacing around her car and glaring at the ground. I could see the tension in her movements, the way her hands trembled as she clenched them into fists. Her obsession had become reckless. She was no longer just trying to drive through my land, she was trying to dominate it. I triggered a hidden motion sensor, activating a small alarm and a sudden spotlight. The beam lit up the road, catching her mid-step. She froze, shielding her eyes, her mouth opening in disbelief. I stepped out from the shadows, keeping my distance, but making my presence undeniable. "Corinne," I said, voice steady, "this ends now. Leave, or face the consequences of your actions." Her eyes widened, a mixture of anger and panic flashing across her face. "You can't do this," she yelled. "I own this road." "No," I replied calmly. "You own nothing here." Every warning, every obstacle, every chance I gave you, you ignored. This is my property, and you will leave. She glanced at the spike strips, the trenches, the barricade I had built. It was all designed to trap her. And for the first time, she realized she couldn't brute force her way through. Her arrogance faltered. She looked around, calculating. Then finally, with a frustrated shout, she retreated to her car. As she drove off, carefully navigating the damaged road, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. The farm was mine, my defenses solid, and for the first time, Corinne seemed to recognize that she was not in control. But deep down, I knew she wouldn't quit. Obsessions like hers didn't fade, they grew. And next time, I had to be ready for anything. That night, I reviewed the footage I had captured. Every trespass, every attempt to bypass my defenses, every frustrated movement, it all painted a clear picture. If Corinne returned, I would have irrefutable evidence. But more importantly, I had learned her patterns, her obsession, and her weaknesses. For the first time, I felt confident. This was no longer a battle of reaction. It was a battle I could win. And when she returned, because she would, I would be waiting. The nights grew longer, the shadows deeper. I could feel Corinne's presence lingering even when she wasn't physically there. Tire tracks, footprints, and small disturbances in the fields reminded me that she was watching, planning, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her obsession had escalated to something almost sinister, and I knew I needed to act before it got out of hand. I spent days reinforcing every defensive measure I had installed. Spike strips were doubled in critical locations, trenches deepened and carefully camouflaged, and decoy strips added in places she might try to bypass. I installed additional floodlights, motion sensors, and even a hidden security camera on the barn roof that overlooked the dirt road. Every inch of the property was now fortified, a maze of deterrents designed to channel her movements into predictable paths. That evening, I noticed a faint glow in the distance. Corinne had returned, and this time she wasn't alone. She drove a black van, larger than any vehicle she had used before. I could see the silhouettes of two men and a woman inside, all tense, all waiting for her signal. Her obsession had grown into an operation, and she seemed convinced that numbers could overcome strategy. I positioned myself in the loft, binoculars focused, heart racing with anticipation. The van crested the hill, moving cautiously. Karen's eyes scanned the road like a predator calculating its attack, while her companions flinched at every small obstacle. The spike strips had been effective so far, but I knew they wouldn't stop a coordinated effort if she got lucky. Halfway down the road, the van struck a concealed trench. The front wheels dug into the dirt, causing the vehicle to tilt violently. The driver Karen slammed on the brakes, swearing, while the others shouted in panic. It was exactly what I had predicted. She was skilled at strategizing, but she had underestimated the sheer number and placement of obstacles I had prepared. I stepped out from the barn, keeping a safe distance but making my presence clear. "Corinne," I called, voice steady. "You're trespassing again. This ends tonight." Her head whipped toward me. Rage flashed in her eyes, but so did hesitation. She glanced at her companions, then at the obstacles strewn across the dirt road. Her confidence faltered for the first time in weeks. "You think a few toys can stop me?" She hissed. "I'll get through this road one way or another." I held my ground. "Every attempt you've made has failed. Every trespass has been documented. You're not in control. Leave or face the consequences." Her companions shifted nervously. The tension in the van was palpable. Karen's authority, the one thing that had allowed her to dominate before, was crumbling under the weight of my preparation and the evidence I had gathered. Then she made her move reckless and desperate. She tried to drive over one of the deeper trenches, ignoring the spike strips entirely. The van lurched violently, stuck, and nearly tipped onto its side. Panic overtook her companions as they scrambled to stabilize the vehicle. I could see the realization in Corinne's face. She had miscalculated. I stepped closer, flashlight in hand, illuminating the road and the trapped vehicle. "Step out," I commanded. "Now, all of you." For the first time, Karen hesitated. The rage and arrogance I had come to expect were replaced by fear. She exchanged worried glances with the others, then slowly climbed out of the van. Her hands trembled as she dropped them to her sides. "You win." "For now," she spat, her voice tight. "This isn't over." I didn't respond. I simply watched as she and her companions backed away, keeping their eyes on me and the fortified road. When they finally disappeared over the horizon, I allowed myself a deep breath. The farm was safe for the moment. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the footage I had captured. Every move, every misstep, every frustrated shout, everything was documented. I knew Corinne wouldn't stop entirely, but I also knew that she had been forced to acknowledge my control. The farm was mine. My rules were clear. And I knew that when she returned, and she would, I would be ready. For the next 2 days, the farm felt unnervingly calm. No tire tracks, no footprints, no distant engines rumbling on the ridge. It should have brought me peace, but instead it felt like the silence you get before a storm, heavy, unnatural, charged with something waiting to explode. Every morning I walked the dirt road with a careful eye, checking spike strips, resetting trenches, scanning the tree line for any subtle sign of her presence, but nothing. Karen had vanished, not defeated, just quiet. And that was more dangerous than any confrontation. On the third night, a storm rolled in thick clouds, low thunder, the kind of wind that made the farm groan. I stayed awake in the barn loft, watching the rain turn the dirt road into slick mud. My cameras worked overtime, their infrared lenses cutting through the darkness, ready to detect even the slightest movement. Around midnight, I caught something a flicker. Not headlights, not a vehicle. A glow. Small, orange, flickering against the wind. Fire. My heart thudded in my chest as I grabbed the binoculars. At the far edge of the farm, near the old cedar fence, a torch was being dragged along the ground, and behind it, Karen, hooded, soaked, her face twisted with something unhinged. She wasn't trying to drive through my land this time. She was trying to destroy it. I ran down the barn ladder and bolted through the rain. The mud sucked at my boots, the wind tearing at my jacket. Thunder cracked overhead as I approached the fence. Karen didn't even notice me at first. She was too consumed by whatever rage had bloomed inside her. "Karen!" I shouted over the storm. She froze. Slowly, she turned toward me, her eyes wild, hair plastered to her face. The torch sputtered in her grip. "You think you won," she snarled. "You think your traps mean you beat me. But if I can't use this road, no one will." Lightning flashed, illuminating the madness in her expression. She wasn't bluffing. She was ready to burn acres of my land just to punish me. I took a slow step forward, hands raised. "Karen, put the fire down. You're trespassing and now you're talking arson. This isn't a game anymore. You'll go to prison for this?" She laughed, a short, sharp, broken sound. "I don't care anymore. All I wanted was to get through your stupid farm. But you had to make it a war. It became a war when you refused to respect my property," I said, keeping my voice calm despite the adrenaline roaring in my veins. "Look around. This land is wet. That fire won't spread. You're not hurting my farm." "You're just hurting yourself." Corinne hesitated. The torch wavered. Her shoulders sagged not in surrender, but in exhaustion. For the first time, I saw how far her obsession had dragged her. She wasn't thinking rationally anymore. She was fueled by frustration, pride, and the inability to accept boundaries. A blast of wind swept through, snuffing the torch instantly. Karen stared at the smoking stick in her hand, disbelief washing over her. "This isn't who you want to be?" I said quietly. Go home. For a moment, she looked like she might collapse. Then, slowly, stiffly, she dropped the burnt stick, turned, and walked away into the storm. No screaming, no threats, just silence. I watched her until she disappeared into the rain. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. By the time I returned to the barn, the mud was sliding off my boots and the storm was starting to ease. I climbed back into the loft, replaying the footage from the cameras. Everything was captured: the torch, her threats, the attempt to start a fire. This wasn't just trespassing anymore, this was a crime. And the authorities would take this one seriously. For the first time, I felt the balance shift. Control wasn't just in my traps or defenses, it was in the truth. Karen had crossed a line she couldn't walk back from, and I knew exactly what the next step would be. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the farm slick and quiet, the air crisp with rain. I called the local authorities immediately, reporting Karen's attempted arson and trespassing. I described everything I had seen and documented: the spike strips, the trenches, the burnt torch, and the tire tracks. I sent the video footage as evidence, knowing it would leave little room for doubt. Within the hour, patrol cars began appearing on the horizon, their lights cutting through the morning mist. I stayed on the porch, watching as officers moved methodically along the dirt road, inspecting the trenches, spike strips, and damaged areas. My heart pounded, a mixture of relief and anticipation. This was the moment that would finally tip the scales. Karen's van and SUV were nowhere in sight, but officers found footprints leading away from the scene and the remnants of the burnt torch. Her desperate act left a trail impossible to deny. I handed over my recordings, and the lead officer nodded approvingly. This is more than enough to press charges, he said. She can't deny any of this. Over the next few hours, the investigation unfolded. Officers scoured the surrounding area, confirming evidence and taking statements from me. My meticulous documentation paid off. The spike strips, trenches, and decoys were all accounted for, showing that Karen had deliberately trespassed and attempted to cause damage. The pattern of her repeated incursions, combined with the attempted arson, made a compelling case. Meanwhile, I took stock of the farm. Despite the chaos, nothing had been permanently destroyed. The trenches and spike strips had done their job. The soil absorbed the rain, and the crops were mostly unharmed. I walked the dirt road slowly, feeling a sense of pride. This land had been tested and survived. By mid-afternoon, the officers left with a plan to locate Karen and issue a formal arrest warrant. I returned to my barn loft and surveyed the property. The dirt road stretched out before me, trenches and spike strips still in place, cameras blinking quietly in their hidden spots. For the first time, I felt an overwhelming sense of security. That evening, I received a call from the lead officer. Karen had been located at a nearby motel, attempting to hide and avoid charges. When confronted, she denied everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. The repeated trespasses, tire tracks, burnt torch, and video recordings left her with no plausible defense. They won't let her ignore this, the officer said. It's criminal trespassing and attempted arson. She could face jail time. I hung up the phone and let out a long sigh. Relief and exhaustion washed over me. The war wasn't over, but the turning point had been reached. Karen had finally crossed the line that even her obsession couldn't justify. That night, I sat on the porch, looking out over the farm. The dirt road, now quiet and intact, seemed almost peaceful. I thought about the past weeks, the chaos, the threats, the relentless trespassing, and realized how much I had learned about strategy, patience, and perseverance. Karen had forced me to defend not just my property, but my boundaries, my sense of control, and my peace of mind. And in doing so, she had taught me the value of being prepared, the importance of anticipating moves before they happened, and the strength of standing firm against someone who refuses to respect limits. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to rest. The farm was safe, the authorities were involved, and Corinne's obsession could no longer threaten me or my home. I knew she might try again, but now the consequences were clear. The rules of this land had been firmly established, and as I watched the sunset paint the fields in golden light, I felt a quiet triumph. This was my farm, my land, my rules. And no one, not Corinne, not her friends, not anyone, would ever challenge that again without facing the full weight of consequence. Over the next few days, the legal machinery began to move swiftly. Karen had been formally charged with criminal trespassing and attempted arson. Her repeated incursions, the tire tracks, footprints, and the video footage I had meticulously gathered left her with little chance of denying her actions. I followed the updates closely, feeling a mix of vindication and relief. Corinne, once confident and untouchable, was unraveling. The authorities tracked her movements, questioned her accomplices, and pieced together the full extent of her obsession with my farm. Every false claim she tried to make was dismantled by the physical evidence-trapped roads, spike strips, trenches, and my recordings of her furious attempts to bypass them. Meanwhile, I continued to patrol the property, ensuring that everything remained secure. I made small repairs where necessary, but the farm itself had survived her repeated attacks with minimal damage. The spike strips and trenches, carefully camouflaged and strategically placed, had done their job perfectly. My dirt road had become a fortress, and every attempt she had made to challenge it now worked in my favor. I heard from the local authorities that Karen had been served with court papers, and that bail had been denied due to the severity of the attempted arson. Her obsession, which had once made her bold and relentless, now worked against her. Friends who had once aided her were distancing themselves, realizing that the legal consequences could affect them too. For the first time, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. Weeks of preparation, observation, and meticulous planning had paid off. I had not only defended my property, but also protected my livelihood and my peace of mind. Every spike strip, every hidden trench, every floodlight and camera was a testament to persistence, strategy, and careful foresight. The day the authorities confirmed Karen's arrest, I watched from my porch as patrol cars took her into custody. She was no longer the wild, fearless figure who had driven through my farm repeatedly. Her arrogance had been stripped away, replaced by a resigned frustration and the consequences of her actions. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The farm was safe, the threat neutralized, and my property, my life, was no longer at the mercy of her reckless obsession. For the first time in weeks, I could move freely, walk my dirt road without anxiety, and enjoy the peace that I have fought so hard to protect. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, I sat quietly on the porch, listening to the gentle hum of the evening insects and the rustle of the wind through the cornfields. The farm was mine again, in every sense protected, secure, and respected. Corinne's obsession had pushed me to the edge, but it had also revealed a strength I hadn't fully recognized in myself. I had defended my land, my boundaries, and my dignity with patience, strategy, and resolve. And in doing so, I had not only won a battle, but also asserted control over the life I had built on this farm. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to breathe fully. The storm had passed, and the farm was at peace. The days after Corinne's arrest were quiet, almost surreal. The farm seemed to exhale, as if it had been holding its breath through weeks of chaos. I walked the dirt road slowly, inspecting every spike strip, every trench, and every floodlight. Each one was intact, a silent testament to the battle that had unfolded here. Without Corinne's presence looming over me, I could finally focus on restoring and improving the farm. I repaired small damages to the fences, reinforced sections of the road that had been stressed by her reckless attempts, and cleared away debris from the trenches and spike strips. The physical labor was therapeutic, each motion a way to reclaim not just my property, but my sense of control and peace. Neighbors, who had observed some of the chaos from a distance, started approaching with cautious congratulations. Some expressed disbelief at the audacity of Karen's actions, others marveling at the defenses I had set up. I remained modest, explaining that it wasn't about confrontation, it was about protecting what was mine. In the evenings, I would sit on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun sink behind the cornfields. The dirt road, once a battlefield, now looked serene under the warm glow of sunset. It was still rugged, marked with tire tracks and footprints from the chaos, but it had a sense of victory now. Every scar told the story of resilience and careful planning. Karen's legal situation progressed quickly. The charges against her trespassing, destruction of property, and attempted arson were serious. Her accomplices faced minor charges, but it was clear she had orchestrated the events. The court filings painted her as reckless, obsessive, and unwilling to respect boundaries. For weeks, I followed the proceedings, knowing that justice was finally being served. One afternoon, I walked the road one last time before winter set in, inspecting the traps I had installed for the last time. I smiled to myself, thinking that they had served their purpose. Some I removed, others I left as reminders, not of fear, but of victory. The farm was mine, protected and respected. As I reached the top of the hill overlooking the property, I took a deep breath. The crops swayed gently in the breeze, the animals grazed peacefully, and the dirt road stretched out, quiet and intact. For the first time in weeks, I felt complete calm. Karen's obsession had tested me in ways I hadn't anticipated. But in the end, preparation, patience, and the courage to defend what was mine had prevailed. The farm was more than a home, it was a fortress of resilience, proof that boundaries were meant to be respected. And as I stood there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I knew one thing for certain: I had won. Winter arrived quietly that year, blanketing the farm in frost and snow. The dirt road, once a battlefield, now lay still and untouched. The spike strips, trenches, and floodlights were either removed or left as silent reminders of the battle that had taken place. The farm, resilient as ever, seemed to glow under the pale winter sun, peaceful and secure. Karen's trial concluded with a conviction. The court acknowledged her repeated trespassing, the destruction she had attempted, and her reckless disregard for property and safety. She faced serious penalties, and her accomplices received lesser consequences. Justice had been served, but more importantly, her obsession could no longer threaten the farm or me. Life returned to normal. The animals thrived, the crops were tended, and the dirt road became a quiet passage once again. The days of hiding in the barn loft, watching the headlights approach, were over. I could walk freely along the property, confident that my boundaries were respected. The experience had changed me. I had learned the value of preparation, vigilance, and patience. I had learned that determination and careful planning could overcome even the most relentless opposition. My farm was no longer just a home or a livelihood. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the strength it takes to protect what is yours. Neighbors who had once watched from a distance began to visit, curious about the stories of the spike strips, trenches, and how the farm had withstood the chaos. I shared lessons without bragging, the importance of defending one's boundaries, staying calm under pressure, and using strategy over brute force. The farm had become a quiet example of victory through preparation. On a particularly clear morning, I stood at the top of the hill overlooking the road. The frost glittered across the fields, the sun casting a warm glow over the land. I breathed in deeply, the crisp air filling my lungs, and felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The farm was mine, fully and completely, no longer threatened, no longer contested. I smiled, knowing that Corinne's obsession and arrogance had been neutralized not with aggression, but with strategy, foresight, and patience. The land was safe, my boundaries respected, and my life unshaken. The storm had passed, and in its wake there was only quiet, strength, and victory. For the first time in months, I could relax fully. The dirt road stretched out before me, clear and unobstructed. The farm thrived, the animals grazed peacefully, and the crops stood tall. Life was steady, secure, and calm. And I knew without a doubt that this peace was hard-earned and permanent.